Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. There is construction literally right outside of my window today, so I want to try to do this every time they're on break. So this might get broken up. Sorry if there's a different flow at one point or another, but I'm doing my best to get these out today. So let's jump right in. Over on the YouTube community support posts, Andrew Wolf has a question, and I think I understand the question. I believe the issue is that Andrew has two 9-inch BVMs, a D9H1U and a D9H5U. The one is in better condition, the 5's kind of beat up, but Andrew's looking to control these with a BVM control remote, so like one of the external remote modules, and only the 5 has the serial port inputs. I think that's it. I actually have two of the D9H5Us here. One of them is actually my main test monitor because of how incompatible it is. We'll get back to that in a minute. But I don't have an H1U and I don't have access to one. So I think that's the issue, that the one doesn't have the serial port controls in the back. And Andrew wanted to know how feasible it is to swap parts around between each. And I would say it's about equal to every other tube swap of an RGB monitor. The only easier thing is that it's smaller. So, maybe you don't have to worry about lifting up a giant heavy tube or anything like that, but it's never as easy as you would think. But, if it's just a tube thing, so if the one has a really great tube and the 5 has a fading one or one that's burned in, then yeah, maybe look into doing some research, I guess, and see how much effort it would take to swap those out. Maybe just take off the case. Obviously, be careful, always make sure you're super careful when working on CRTs. The smaller the monitor, the less the charge that's built up, I believe. So it's a little safer to be working on a 9 than a 32, but just be careful. I did switch a few things around on mine, and it was just a whole lot of screws, but I didn't do a tube swap. So, I guess I would just kind of take the sides off, take a look at it, and see if it's something that you'd be willing to dig into, but it is kind of a pain. And I'm not even 100% sure that you can do a tube swap. I assume that you could, because these monitors have tons of interchangeable parts in them, but I wouldn't know for sure unless I tried or if I talked to somebody who did it. So sorry about that. On the other questions, you've heard me mention the weird sync issue on top. Is there a good way to resolve it? No, not at all. The issue is the way the sync signals in any of the source devices are sent and combined together. So, even like a Sega Master System will inside the chip generate the signal as RGB-HV and then combine the signal inside the chip and then go onto the motherboard through the video amp as RGBS. And the way the signal is combined is the issue. Now, I'm oversimplifying just for time. Steve did that great article, so if you just search RetroRGB for, Steve or HD Retrovision, you'll see the article he wrote about sync. And that is the issue. And on a lot of other BVMs and PVMs, they're a lot more tolerant of different ways of combining sync, and you don't have that issue. So the only way to fix it is to do a true sync regeneration. And the G-SCART switch does that. The latest G-SCART does it for Sega Master System, but not for a lot of other stuff. Now, I mean, you're just going to find a ton of incompatibilities, arcade boards, certain other consoles. And so no, there's no easy way to resolve it yet. I've been talking to a few people about making a sync regeneration device, but it's complicated, and it's one of these things that everybody with a BVM that has the problem would buy, but how many people is that really? So are they going to dump 1,000 hours of research into something that'll sell 100? And I don't blame them. It's not completely off the table. It's just when everybody has time, they'll start working on it. So, but that one device also has a bunch of other uses. So I'm going to keep politely nudging. But to be honest, the reason I use this as my main test monitor is because of its incompatibilities. So essentially, if it works on this, it'll work on every other CRT. Also, it has up to 1080i, which is pretty great for testing 480p and 720p signals. It's also finicky with those other resolutions too sometimes, but I just found it to be a really great way to test a lot of stuff. But I would never recommend them as monitors to use and game on unless you knew for sure that whatever source that you had already worked on it. I would buy any of the other PVM 8 inches to do that with. And also, you said you have a 14 MDU and a 8044Q, so that's probably one of the more compatible ones. And you use a GCOM switch to connect them all through component. That's pretty cool. So then you just link them all together and stuff like that. So sorry I don't have any better info for you, but I mean, when you're using those monitors, you're kind of you're playing with fire in that you're not always going to have good compatibility, and they're super finicky. One of mine does a weird pulse thing where it looks like somebody is taking the focus ring of a camera and just doing this all the time. So if you're looking to get rid of them and get more compatible ones, let me know, because I always have developer friends that want these for the exact reason I do, because they're not that great. So if you want to swap them out for more compatible ones, I'll see if I could help. But this is just going to be an issue that you're going to have to run into with a lot of these things. Per from Sweden had a question about MiSTer and the future of it. The question is, as we get more complex cores that take up more space, will we ever jump ship to another more powerful FPGA board? And if so, which one? So the answer to that question is pretty easy. The reason people use the DE10 Nano as opposed to anything else out there is because that chip, the FPGA chip that's on that dev board, I think is averaging $250 just for the chip, and it's at least $100 cheaper to have that full dev board. And I think Intel subsidizes that because they want people to use this as educational tools, which technically the MiSTer project absolutely is. A lot of people are learning by programming on that stuff. And that's good and it's bad. It's good because it's so much cheaper, but it's bad because there's a lot of restrictions to that DE10 versus if you just had that chip and you were able to make your own board all the way around that. So I think if we ever jump ship to another more powerful FPGA board, it would either be one of two things. It would either be whatever the DE10 Nano successor would be, and there's no info on that at all. It might not ever happen. It might happen tomorrow. It might happen 10 years from now. No info on that whatsoever. But if a successor to that with the same exact pinout does get released, it should be fairly easy to port everything over, so there's backward compatibility and all that other good stuff. The other possibility would be if somebody made a FPGA machine designed for retro gaming and was selling that. But the problem is that's a big risk because that's a lot of development. Then you have to make sure that you get all of the inputs and outputs correct. You have to make sure you have room for expansion. It's going to cost a lot of money. And then you have to make sure that the community will even adopt it and buy it, because there's a good chance people will say, well, this is better in every possible way, but it's also, $200 more than a MiSTer kit. So no, I'm not switching to that. And then now you've just wasted all your time and your money. So I've been trying to talk to different developers about doing something like that. Most of them don't have any desire to do it at all. And some of them are looking at alternatives, but respectfully, I don't think they're looking at it from the right perspective. And this is one of the only things that I could confidently say I'm good at. Since I was 19 years old at my first corporate job, while I've held different roles, the real skill that I had was being able to talk to these devs that are all much smarter than I will ever be, and talk to just regular people who use whatever it is that I'm working on, and be able to find a happy middle ground between everything. And oftentimes users have questions that seem so simple, like why can't we just output 4K, which is a really complicated answer, and it takes somebody that's able to talk to both sides. So I really hope some of the devs that were considering this will reach out. I've tried contacting at least a couple of them. I hope they'll listen. I would never strongly say that I'm an expert in much, if anything, but this is probably one of the only things. And I guess we'll see what happens. I don't know if there's going to ever be another successor. Maybe it'll just be the DE10 Nano forever, and then something else happens after that. No clue, but all good questions. I just, at the moment, for the short term, if you're into this stuff, be confident buying the DE10 and be confident buying a MiSTer kit, because even if something else comes along that runs the same cores, that DE10 can be used for like 5 or 6 other things at least that I've been hearing about. So it's a worthwhile tool. It's not going to be as usable as like a Raspberry Pi. If you bought a Pi 4 right now or a Pi 3 and you decided you don't want to use it for gaming anymore, I could probably list 20 different things that you could easily do yourself. Whereas the DE10, it's not as much, but it's still not a waste of your money. And the last part of your question was, if we switch to a new board, what other cores could we possibly see? I don't know, and I don't know if that's something that would really affect gaming at all, because there are certain things like the DS FPGA would need a different kind of RAM or faster and more RAM in order to make that work, I believe. But then what else past that would we want in an FPGA? Maybe 50 years from now, there's an FPGA out that could do a PS3 and a PS4 or a PS5 or whatever. But the question is, would you really need that? Would you benefit more and cheaper from a device that uses software emulation with a dedicated GPU, but hard-coded software emulation for that device that allows you to do things like match the exact input to screen latency as the original consoles, things like run-ahead mode and tapping into the buffer before it gets generated as a video signal. I know what I'm saying, but I'm not smart enough to articulate it. Devs are either rolling their eyes at me right now or going, all right, fair. So I don't know what other cores we could see, and I don't know if it's anything that would apply to us as retro gamers. Maybe in the future when PS5 is considered retro, that would apply, but I don't know how much we would be affected by that. Maybe like Virtual Boy or something. But I don't even know enough about that console to know how well it could be done with software emulation if some real hard work is done. So, great questions, Per. Sorry I don't have super solid answers, but hopefully I could at least clarify kind of the perspective on some of this. Bad Reality wants to know if I'd be open to adding some of the Lexar cards to my noisy SD card tests. So I am not doing any of the testing. It's really been the MD Fourier team. Bernie's done a ton of testing on that. For me personally, anything I do is going to be verifying their results, not because I'm questioning them, just because as nerds, it's our duty to verify results like this. That's why I really like when people say, oh, I have that crappy scaler that you warned me about, and I did a lag test on it, and you're right, it has 3.5 frames of lag. Like, I like stuff like that. We should be verifying each other's work just to make it all even more confident when we talk about it. But other than that, the only stuff I'll be doing is any weird things I have out of curiosity, and they're definitely going to be, I would consider them the experts in this. So if I do find something that's interesting enough, I'm going to mail it to them or just see if anybody has it to test, because they're going to be a lot more solid with this stuff. So good question, but I'm going to leave it up to them and just help verify the results and, of course, write about it and promote their work. Kelv SYC was following up with some questions about widescreen, and I don't think I understand the question. Respectfully, I'm not putting you down or anything, but I'll just read the question and then see if I could try to answer it. But as you know, consoles such as the Wii have a system setting where they can select between 4:3 and 16:9, where they instead output an anamorphic widescreen signal that is, while 4:3, meant to be stretched externally into a 16:9 picture, perhaps by the TV scaler. The question is, for those of us whose TVs don't do such stretching, does there exist a device that will perform the stretching and convert the 4:3 picture into a native 16:9 while taking gaming considerations like display lag into mind? I don't know if I've ever seen a TV that didn't have a 4:3 or 16:9 setting. Maybe I have and I just didn't notice because I didn't need it. But you say for those of us, does that mean you have a TV that won't do that? So if you set your Wii to 16:9, will it still be squished in a 4:3 image on your TV? And if so, there's no setting at all? Normal mode, full mode, direct mode. I've heard it called a million things, not just 4:3 or 16:9, but I don't think I've ever seen a flat panel or even really a computer monitor that didn't have some kind of settings for that. So I didn't even realize that was a thing, if so. So I guess I'm going to have to cop out on this answer and just ask more questions and hope to come up with something for next week. John and BK said they've been trying to find solid documentation on correcting the expansion and disk system audio in their twin Famicom. Best they found is an old Voltar post, but the pics are gone. Yeah, the pics are gone is why I absolutely hate using forums for continuing info like this, and which is why the wiki is going to be such an important place, because you don't host pictures on Imgur, you host them on the wiki forever. So I feel your pain on that one. I've never personally worked on a twin Famicom like that before, and I guess I would just check maybe on NestDev. I think Ace may have done some research on that. I don't know if he dug into the twin Famicom or if it was just the original Famicom, but that's a good question, and that's info that if you figure it out, like, save the pictures, and once the wiki's up, please post them so we could archive this. N wants to know if I or anyone have tried the Time Sleuth or another lag tester device with a projector. I have not. I don't have access to any projectors, and I think I have one stashed away somewhere in storage, but I don't think that it would work. I think it's because it would be reading the light that's being shined onto the projection screen, and if the Time Sleuth is in front of the screen, the light would be hitting it and not the screen. But I could very well be wrong. There could be some other trick in order to make that happen. If you need to test a projector, I would use the 240p test suite in a CRT the same way I used to do it. It's going to be accurate within about a frame, so it's certainly not going to give you millisecond accuracy like the Time Sleuth would, but it's better than nothing. So I guess if anybody has a projector, maybe chime in and let us know if you've been able to get it to work with any kind of lag testing device at all. The only other thing that I think would work is the do-it-yourself Raspberry Pi tester, because that essentially is just you're taking a camera and you're taking a picture of when the LED light lights up and when the image comes on screen. So that should be able to work. So if everybody can confirm that lag test devices don't work, but that one would, that would be pretty cool. And just search RetroRGB. It was only a few weeks ago, and that's a do-it-yourself project that you could slap together right away. And even just use your cell phone camera, set it to 240 frames per second, and you should have a really good, you should be able to get at least within half a frame, which is, pretty decent. Jeremy Hopkins just wanted to share a video of a Mac CRT being rejuvenated with older equipment, and I've seen this video. A bunch of people have sent it to me. It looks pretty cool, so I just wanted to pass it along for anybody that was interested. I always enjoy stuff like this. I don't post a lot of news articles about it because while RetroRGB has been very technically oriented, some stuff really does fall into like the expert category. And anytime working on a CRT is part of it, I always like to be careful because I do think, not this video, but I do think there's been a lot of videos out there that were just straight up irresponsible, telling people just go ahead and stick your screwdriver inside a CRT. So, but yeah, if you're interested, I'll leave a link to the video for anybody who wants to watch it. MUSNES had a question, and I actually have two different solutions to this question, and pick whichever is easiest for you. The question is, they have a G-SCART switch version 3.4, which has the VGA output on it. They have the SCART output connected to the OSSC, and everything's already working great, but they want to do some testing and would like to connect the second output to a RetroTink 2X Pro. What cables or adapters are needed to get component into the 2X Pro? So, there's two choices. You can get a custom cable from RetroAccess that plugs into the VGA port of the G-SCART switch. Make sure you switch it to RGB-S, not RGB-HV output. There's just the toggle switch right there. And then have the SCART output of that have a resistor on the sync line to drop the voltage down from TTL level to something that's safe for other devices. And that's all you would need. It's going to be a little expensive. It's probably like a $40 or $50 cable. I'm just guessing. But complete, perfect solution. You don't have to worry about it. The alternative, though, the G-SCART switch version 3.4 has a low-pass filter built into it. In fact, I already posted a guide for people that want to add a switch to that, but to unbolt and rebolt the G-SCART takes forever. So the fact that it's on anyway is kind of a good thing in this scenario, because then you could take the VGA output and go into the VGA input of the OSSC, which does not have, that input doesn't have access to the low-pass filter. But since the G-SCART already has one, if all 15 kilohertz sources should be fine. And then just use a standard SCART cable to go to the RetroTink 2X Pro, and that's all you'd have to worry about. So Both are good solutions. I think the cheaper one is probably to just buy a SCART cable and then buy a good shielded VGA cable. I linked to decent ones on my Amazon store, so check that link as well. So I would check either. For me personally, because the low pass filter is already turned on, I would at least try the VGA port, because the cable I think is $10. So I mean, it seems like an easy thing to test out to see if it's worth it. And then of course you're just going to need a 3.5 millimeter audio cable to run stereo audio from the G-SCART into the OSSC's other audio input. But I would start with that one just because it's cheap, and see if that works well for you. And if so, then just grab a SCART cable, or I guess even a SCART coupler. I had the still have it here. I had that prototype that I've been showing off. Prototype covered in tape. Hopefully there'll be a production version of this soon. That's always a decent enough solution. So, hey, pick either one, see whatever works for you. But I would test the VGA first, just for the heck of it. Nurtak said in Q&A 108, someone asked about hooking up a DAC. I'm assuming you mean analog DAC. One suggestion I made was to use a VGA to BNC cable to hook it up through component video, but that confused me. The VGA to BNC cable leaves you with 5 prongs for video, but component only uses 3. Do you just not plug in 2 of them? What do they do? And do you lose anything by not using them? Just don't plug them in. You don't lose a thing. Now, to answer your question, though, on that VGA part of it, the pins that are connected in that cable are RGB, HV, horizontal and then vertical sync. And the analog DAC uses the horizontal sync pin to send C-sync. So you would just not hook up the vertical sync line if you were using it directly into like a PVM or something like that. You would just hook that directly up and be done with it, and then just leave it hanging. Now, for component video, it's all you would need are the RGB lines, and it would just pump out that signal from the DAC itself. The cable's just passing it through. And yes, you would just leave the 2 syncs dangling because you wouldn't need them. Now, I'd probably wrap them in black tape or something just so they didn't touch anything, because the outer sides are ground, and while it's not going to blow anything up, like if ground touches something, you might get a weird interference ripple. So I wouldn't cut them off, but I would just wrap some black tape around and make sure they don't short into anything, and maybe zip tie it back to the cable itself in case you ever wanted to use it again. But yeah, that's all you would need to do. Just don't connect them at all. It's just sync. But if you set the DAC to component video mode, it won't be sending a signal down those at all. So it's as if they weren't even there. Javier Vega Excalibur has a couple of questions. First, they say, apologies in case this has been asked or if this question is noobish. Don't ever worry about that. I welcome all questions. I'm happy to help, and I'm glad that somebody else is joining into the scene. So don't ever feel intimidated by the wide variety of crap that gets thrown your way sometimes. But unfortunately, there's no easy way to answer this. I guess I'm going to skip to your last question first, because that's a little bit easier. You say, I think it would be most convenient if you could use your PS2 to also play those PS1 games, but you're not sure if that would be the best solution. Easy answer to this then. Look up some of the charts they have. Just Google PS2 backward compatibility and see if the PS1 games that you're looking to play have issues on your specific model PS2. And if they do, you're probably going to want to bounce between both. If they don't, then just use your PS2 confidently and you don't have to worry. Or some games have issues that even though I'm a bit of a OCD nitpicking for some of this stuff, some of the games have issues that I don't care about at all. It doesn't affect the gameplay, it doesn't add lag or anything like that. So I would just look that up. Now, I'll give you the easy version. If you're just looking to use the PS2 and you don't care about 480p, I would just get a RetroTink product, the Rad2X, a RetroTink 2X, whatever it is, and just use that. And the Rad2X could even work on the PS1 should you ever need to use it. And it only outputs 480p, so it's not going to be as sharp as the OSSC, as you mentioned. But there is less time between dropping between resolution switching. Also, you have to check to see if the games that you want to play switch resolutions at all. If they don't, then it's not an issue for you, and you could just use an OSSC and not have to worry about it. So I think I'd really want to know how much deeper you're looking to go in, because you did say you're kind of just getting started in this stuff, because there's so many different ways to answer it, and the biggest factor that's going to be a problem is if you're going to be using 480p on PS2, and then you're going to need multiple solutions. If not, then there's a lot of other easy ways that you can go about doing it, including just simply plugging in a Rad2X or the RetroTink products and just going from there. So that might be your solution, going from there into an HDMI splitter, one into your capture card, one into your TV. But if you want to ask, or if you want to give more details as to the questions, I could dig deeper next week and really walk you down the exact path that you're looking to go down. Bad Reality wanted to talk a little bit more about S-Video and how it pertains to the Rad2X, and the fact that I'm still getting questions about this means I didn't do as good a job as I thought explaining it all. You know, when you get really deep into some of these projects and you already know the answers, sometimes that's the hardest time in order to explain things. That's why very often when I'm learning something new, I'll take notes then, so that when I go to do a video on it or something, I'll have it from the perspective of somebody that's brand new into it and somebody who's been using it. But I'll try to re-explain it again, hopefully one last time, in the context of the Rad2X. So we're talking about N64 to a 480p line doubler, which on your average TV, which these days is a 4K TV, so you're taking that 240p signal, line doubling it to 480p, soft scaling it to 4K. In that scenario, I can't really tell a difference between composite and S-Video with most bright screens, and while I can in dark screens, not that big a deal, at least to me, and I look at sharpness in these comparisons all day long. What I ended the N64 section with, I thought was going to be the most telling sign, and that I strongly believe that composite video with the filter on looks better than S-Video. Now, I'm not saying composite looks better than S-Video, I'm just saying that the filter on composite made it look better than S-Video without a filter, and I just wanted to make the point that I think in the confines of the N64, going to 480p, scaling to 4K, I really think that the filter is the important part, not the signal. I think everything else kind of looks awesome. And that's why I used pictures or video of my TV and not captures. Because if I had done direct captures and line doubled them, things would have been a lot different looking, and it would not have been a realistic demo of it. And to say that a different way, if you were to take S-Video and composite, go through the Core U transcoder into the OSSC up to 1080p, then yeah, you're going to notice a pretty big difference between composite and S-Video, because now you're sharp scaling to 1080p, integer scaled. Same if you were to do it on like a Sony PVM, composite and S-Video would look much different. And of course, if there were ever someday a 4K scaler for the N64, yeah, there would be a big difference between composite and S-Video. But in that confines, in the 480p line double, soft scaled to 4K, no. And I think that's really the confusion that's left, is that people are saying, but how could you say that? On my PVM, there's a giant difference, and they're right, because I didn't explain that part of it. So I think it's just really important to keep context in mind with all of this stuff. I'll try my best to do a better job explaining it, but hopefully the pictures spoke for themselves. I think anybody, especially if you watch it in 4K, I think it's very obvious in that scenario on your average TV what the differences are and aren't. Semantics aside, I think at the end of the day, I stand by everything that I said in the conclusions, and that adding $10 cost to a product just for a small percentage upgrade that may or may not cause issues with some PAL N64s, just not worth it at all. So, if you'd like me to elaborate more, let me know, because obviously I'm not doing the greatest job explaining this, but I think that was good enough. A question from Focus. Is that how you say it? Focux? I'm guessing Focus, but if you say you're new here, so I am always messing up people's names. Please, there's no disrespect meant. I'm going to try my best. But your question is, you have a G-SCART switch to a Framemeister to an HDMI switch that also shares modern consoles. I also use a Lightberry setup for some cool effects, which requires a splitter. I've tried quite a lot of switches and combinations, but nothing really fits the automated solution I've dreamed of. Do you have a recommended auto switch that can handle everything I throw at it? As a follow-up, is there a splitter you'd recommend to run my Lightberry? My understanding is they often don't work well since it may hinder the resolution of any 4K going to the TV. And also, thank you for the kind words. But to answer your question, Dave, aka Dirk Swizzler, has a thread up on Shmups where they're talking about different HDMI switches that work for them. I'll make sure to link that, but that's a great place to find HDMI switches that work. And as far as splitters, you're going to need a splitter that's 4K 60 compatible if you're using modern consoles with it as well. And I haven't had any experience with those. The View HD splitters I was using are only rated up to 1080p 60. So I don't have an answer for you on that one, but I bet you they would know in that thread. So I'll make sure to leave a link. And welcome. Thanks for joining. Mr. Pete 1985 wants to know if there's any guides on replacing a NES, SNES, or Game Boy SRAM with FRAM. I heard there are issues with the way the write enable works on FRAM that don't make them a drop-in replacement. I have no idea. That is an excellent question. I can't remember anybody telling me if they've gotten that working reliably or not. That's probably more of a Voltar question. But sorry, I don't really remember if that's possible at all. And I know there's always some kind of issues when you're doing stuff like that. But I think there were some cartridges that used it in later consoles that you would be able to do a switch. But I don't know about those three. So I apologize. I got nothing for you. Our set said they had an RGB modded N64 and want to know if I think it looks better on an LED TV with the OSSC or with the Framemeister. So before I answer, I just want to let you know it's a very close comparison. This is not like the difference between a cheap, junky solution and a good one. Both of these devices are awesome. I prefer the OSSC because it's zero lag and it doesn't compress the colors at all, which I don't know if you'd be able to even notice that on the N64, probably more with the 8 and 16-bit consoles where there's lots of solid colors on the screen. So they're very close. The advantage of the Framemeister is it's compatible with everything. And that's pretty much it. Whereas the OSSC, there's a chance that you plug your N64 into it and it might not be compatible with 1080p mode, only 720p or 480p. Overall, if you're looking for a plug-and-play, like just set it and forget it solution, as I've been saying, I still think the Rad2X is the best because of that smoothing filter that, in my opinion, really makes the N64 graphics blend together a little bit nicer on a flat panel. But if you're specifically talking about OSSC versus Framemeister, my choice is the OSSC by far. And price is also a giant factor in that. I mean, we're talking, even when they were still made, it's over $400 for a full Framemeister set and like $150 for an OSSC. So definitely my suggestion. Also, thank you very much for your support. Welcome. Glad to see you. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate all of it. And let me know if you have any other questions or if there was a specific use case in mind other than general use. But thanks for joining, and hopefully I got your question. Obed Samuel opened up with a bunch of really nice things. Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words. The actual question was, they recently finished an RGB bypass on a Genesis Mega Drive and also installed one of the SMD decoupling caps across the RGB pins that Voltar discovered. And I recently mentioned a few other parts that Jose figured out, a few other spots that Jose figured out to add the coupler. Do I know their values, or do I know what values work best at these additional locations? I am 99% sure, probably 99.9%, that Jose just used the exact same decoupling cap in all three spots. The other two spots are shown in the triple bypass video, and as soon as the wiki's up, this stuff will definitely be nailed down, but I'm pretty sure it's the exact same cap on all three places. So I'll try to follow up on that as soon as I can. The wiki's coming along. It's got some pretty impressive updates to it. Behind the scenes updates. When it launches, it's going to look like every other website. But I'm happy with how it's turning out. So hopefully that'll be out soon. So hopefully that answered your question. It's certainly safe to try it with those. If you have any problems, just remove it. But I'll definitely keep everybody updated. And thanks again for your support and the kind words. Jason Guffey has an Atari 2600, but no display that will accept RF. And there's a very easy solution around this. Find yourself a beat up old VCR, even one that eats tapes or something. Power it on, set it to channel 3 or 4, plug the RF in, and use the composite video out. I haven't even found separate devices that do this, so using a VCR is by far the cheapest and easiest way around it. And I think that's probably going to be your best bet just for testing. Bad Reality mentioned that you could plug RF directly into your flat panel and have it do a channel scan with the console running, but I've seen flat panels that don't have analog tuners anymore, only digital tuners, so that wouldn't work unless your flat panel was a few years old. And I'm assuming this also means that you don't have a CRT. So in those scenarios, like if you had a PVM, which doesn't have RF input, just using the VCR might be a perfectly fine solution. It's extra stuff in the way, so if you'd probably want to do a composite or S-video mod just for the heck of it. But if you don't have a CRT and you go looking for a VCR and you stumble across a small, consumer grade CRT with RF in, I would try that. I mean, you can get those for pretty much free these days, and 2600s would be okay on that. I mean, unless you're in a busy city like me where RF, there's so many wireless networks around here, RF is just unusable, whereas composite still looks fine. But, just wanted to throw another solution out there. So hopefully that'll point in the right direction, but I think a VCR is probably the way to go. Kirk says they found an arcade cab they like and they're thinking of buying it. It's a candy cab, and at the moment it has a Pandora box attached to it. Just wondering how easy it would be to put in an arcade board to replace it. Am I right to assume that I could just throw in a Street Fighter 2 board without spending more money or making adjustments? In that scenario, there's two things you got to remember. First, depending on which candy cab it is, make sure it has a JEMMA harness and not anything else. If that's the case, you should be able to just plug in a Street Fighter 2 board without any issues, but you're still going to always have to make adjustments with arcade machines. You're going to have to figure out how to wire up the extra buttons for button 5 and 6 on both players. The levels could be off. You could have to adjust the brightness for red, green, and blue. I would always encourage somebody who's an enthusiast to try this stuff out. You could always resell it if it's not for you later. But just know that anything arcade related is never going to be perfect, not even close, and it's always going to have some kind of adjustment or finicky thing with it. So, there's projects out there, and there's certainly forums out there that would help you get things rolling a little bit, but it's never going to be as easy of a solution as taking like a CPS to HDMI and plugging it in a 1 millisecond lag flat screen, and then everything in that scenario is pretty much perfect. Get yourself an IO board for your controllers and you're done. There is no setup. Whereas you have an actual CRT based cabinet, there's always going to be some iffiness. You have another question. Do you believe there's any correlation between handwriting and soldering? I have some of the worst handwriting, and I haven't bothered with soldering as I think I'd be pretty bad at it, but I have a Mega Drive that needs recapping, and I'm trying to find one in Australia to do it, which is pretty expensive. So that's an excellent point. I don't know. That's certainly a good question. But I mean, I guess I've seen people who are really good at painting that don't have the greatest handwriting. And, but then again, you have somebody who does calligraphy and their handwriting is probably immaculate. So I don't know. That's a very good question. I always have pretty bad handwriting as well, but my soldering's getting a lot better. And a lot of it's the tools that I use now too. Just don't use junk tools. But recapping a Genesis, if you have the right tools, that should be fairly easy. If you don't have a desoldering iron, you could very carefully use your soldering iron to heat up the pins and pull one pin at a time out of the capacitor out of the board. Be really careful not to yank too hard, or you're going to pull up traces, and then that's a nightmare. You will need a professional. If you have a desoldering iron, it's fairly simple. Add new solder, use the desoldering iron to remove the old, and go from there. But if you're just doing a recap on a Genesis, there aren't many tiny places that you need to solder to, whereas like an RGB bypass for a Genesis one, it's going to be pretty tricky. You're going to have to lift pins and all that stuff. So but I would give it a try and see, and let me know what you think, because that's a good question. Well, that's it for this week. Hopefully some of the construction that's outside didn't bleed through the microphone. And also, if I seemed exasperated at any point, it was not because of your question. It's just because many times in this, I would get halfway through an answer and then they would start jackhammering and drilling and the whole apartment would shake, and it feels like somebody put my head in a metal bucket and was smashing on the side of it. So that's usually not what it's like here. So if you're new to these Q&As, you don't have to deal with this every week, I promise. And if you are new to these Q&As, Q&As. Ask any question you would like wherever it is that you support in the latest support post. The way these systems work, I can't just go and check all comments and figure out which are new or not. And I have to turn on comments on YouTube because of the algorithm, but respectfully, these Q&As are for all of you, just as a thank you. As you could probably hear, the drilling starting again, so I'm just going to end this real quick. Sorry for the noise, and I'll see you all next week.